Hello, my name is Matthew, and Steve Donahue and I are reading The Vampire Lestat, a novel by Anne Rice for the month of October. Having a great time, and I'm not so much surprised by how much I'm enjoying the book. Right at the very beginning, I knew I was going to be having a lot of fun. I am surprised by how thought provoking I find many of these pages. The thoughts of Lestat and these philosophical discussions that come up. When we left these characters after parts 2 and 3, Lestat is now a vampire. He's transformed his mother, Gabriel, into a vampire, and they are living in Paris. And Lestat is still deeply tied to his humanity and um, his past life, his mortal life. He has friends and family, and he still wants to go about town and go to the theater and be on stage. And all the while, we are hearing more about this presence, this demonic presence. And part 3 ends with we finally have a confrontation. Um, Other vampires arrive. We have a face to face confrontation with Lestat in the cathedral, with the head of the vampires, who, um, although it's blasphemous, has also entered the church. And what happens next, I found to be so brilliant. Instead of um, strictly having vampire fights and supernatural elements, and there of course are many aspects of that. There are fights and supernatural things, but um, Lestat and his mom are kidnapped and taken below a graveyard, a crypt underneath of a graveyard that um, is stinking and wretched and foul and putrid. Um, and they've kidnapped, this coven has kidnapped Lestat's dear, intimate friend, Nicholas, who is petrified. And what we have is this confrontation between the head vampire, Armand, and our protagonist that we're following along, Lestat. And we learn a lot about the mythology of vampires when we finally do meet some other vampires in the book. Instead of having a big blowout fight, they have a discussion, this metaphysical discussion. We learn that uh, these vampires are religious zealots, and they're um, essentially puritanical. They have religious rites that they follow. They believe in and worship and fear Satan. There's traditions that have been carried on for centuries, and so uh, they see Lestat as a heretic, a religious heretic, in their eyes, from their vampire religion. And Lestat, born and growing up in the age of enlightenment, has his own worldview that's distinct and quite opposite from any sort of traditional God fearing or Satan fearing religion. And there's vampires that are saying, you're going into these churches and you're spending time with mortals. Satan's gonna get you. And Lestat responds, um, in effect, saying, well, he hasn't gotten me yet. And this philosophical argument is what concludes the conflict. There's a little bit of a battle, but it's a battle of other than the fist fighting and things like that. Um, I loved that it was a battle of the minds. Really fascinating. Nicholas, meanwhile, the kidnapped intimate friend of Lestat, escapes and, or I should say, is rescued. Very quickly, he is also turned into a vampire. And much like his mother, much like Lestat, each transformation that we've seen has had unexpected or surprising results. Lestat's mother immediately just found herself instinctually a part of this vampire lifestyle. When Lestat rescues and transforms Gabriel, he is bitter and full of animosity, and there's this conflict, this passionate butting of heads that has always been a part of their relationship, intimate as it has been, but now it's swelled, and the differences between Lestat and Armand are now unreconcilable. We do have the introduction of the vampire Armand, the leader of this coven. Lestat's arguments for why he isn't bound to live the lifestyle of these religious zealot vampires collapses the pillars of their coven. It just completely dismantles by Lestat's arguments. We now have Armand, who finds himself disillusioned and abandoned by centuries of tradition. The vampires, meanwhile, decide, along with Nicholas, that they are going to start a vampire theater, which is probably, at least initially, I found it one of the more unsatisfying subplots. It grew on me, but Lestat and his mother Gabriel decide to go to Egypt. They're going to start traveling, and we have when Armand makes his introduction, and we have a distinct the story of Armand, almost a biography within a memoir within a memoir. And he tells the story of his transformation and of a vampire named Marius, who lived in Venice and had been was centuries old, and he was a painter. He made beautiful works of art, and he would go off and talk about how he is tending to and watching he had this phrase like the ones that must be kept. And Armand wants this lifestyle, wants this mysticism and magic and supernatural powers and immortality. He is becoming closer and asking Marius for these secrets, and he does he does transform. He does become a vampire, but Marias is withholding information, saying you're not ready um, until you can only give this knowledge when you are willing to do so. And vampires break into the house and they burn Marias on a pyre. And they turn to Armand and they want to know these secrets. And Armand realizes the brilliance of this centuries old vampire, the brilliance of his insights, because he truly does not know. And they can read minds, and so they can tell that he doesn't know. And if he did know, he would have given this information out unwillingly. We learn that part of this vampire lore and religious tradition is to have a total breakaway, a total departure from any mortal ideology. And so it's a breakaway from materialism. There's no arts, there's no painting, there's no literature that can be left by vampires. They can't write anything down. They can't say their name or where they're from. And I found this to be so fascinating. And not that these vampires come off as sympathetic, but there's something pitiful about a worldview like that and a lifestyle of no creation, no creativity, no outlet, in a creature that can live for centuries, a creature that is immortal and can gain so much knowledge, and to not have any avenue of imparting or expressing the huge amount that you could imagine that one could learn and absorb, and is relating that and thinking, um, never mind being immortal, but about having a finite amount of time. And you can just as easily have a lifestyle where you live 80 years and you don't produce anything, you don't add anything. And if you think about our history, the centuries that we have, and all of the great public projects, works of architecture, beautiful magisterial buildings, and culture with cuisine that has been going on for generations, and all of the books that have been written by some of the greatest minds that ever lived, and to think, what if there was this philosophy of a total departure for any materialism, and we didn't leave anything behind, and we didn't grow and learn from our mistakes? I find that extremely thought-provoking and rather surprising, coming from a supernatural thriller type story. And Lestat and his mother, they do travel. Lestat is still personally tied to his relationships in Paris and his family. He has an attorney of sorts, Rajet, who's a terrific background character, constantly sending letters. Lestat always wants to know what's happening, and we have turmoil and the revolution going on in Paris while Lestat is abroad. Meanwhile, Lestat believes that this centuries-old vampire, Marius, who did have all this knowledge, didn't die, and that he believes that he still truly does exist, and he is putting these inscriptions everywhere that him and his mother go as they travel. Him and his Lestat and his mother's relationship starts to fracture during this trip. She is becoming more and more separated from any sort of mortal lifestyle, and Lestat, um, who's interested in learning more from the mythology and history of vampires, is still extremely tied to his mortal past. And we come to the end of part 6. It's so interesting. Like we don't really have a villain anymore. Initially, we had this presence that was looming ominously over this story, and we had Armand, who was this initial villain, and it's changed now. Lestat's life has changed, and his interests have changed, and now we're on this adventure-seeking journey. He's trying to find Marius, and at the very end of chapter 6, Lestat has been buried for days. He's dying, but cannot die. He hasn't been devouring the blood that he needs to survive, but he's just rotting and becoming a corpse of himself, ever weaker and more vulnerable. And finally, after all of this time, after all of this traveling, going from Paris to through France and Spain and Italy and through the Mediterranean and Asia Minor and to Egypt, all of these places that he's gone, Marius is the one that finally gets him out of the ground and delivers some of his ancient blood to revitalize Lestat. And now these two have met. Very interested to see where it goes from here. Marius seems to be an incredibly intriguing figure, and I love in this world the idea of some vampires that have lived for centuries, that are creating and are painting, and musicians, and writing histories and novels. What would that be like, to be a painter and you've been painting for centuries? Hopefully they're good. So that's where I am right now. If you're reading along, please let me know how you're enjoying the book. I'll be interested to hear Steve's thoughts as well. And like I said, it was parts 4, 5, and 6 this week. And I have a feeling that I'll be finishing the novel by next week. It's really entertaining, thought-provoking reading. So thank you for watching. Please leave a comment if you would like, and take care.